Sometimes the prior art is not exactly the same, but it's close. And so there's a framework which they go through to make that decision. They determine the scope of and the content of the prior art by doing a search, so they know what's there that's close to it. They look at the gap between what you've described as your invention and what the prior art has, and what is that difference they try and identify. And then they say, would that be obvious for a person of ordinary skill in the art to make that leap? And that's basically the framework they use to determine obviousness. And some signs that something's obvious. A lot of times in hindsight, people think it's obvious, but before you did it, it wasn't so obvious. And some evidences, some secondary considerations are evidence of commercial success. If you went from nothing to some huge business, something must have been non-obvious. Otherwise, people would have done it before and achieved that same success. You know, if it solved a problem that's been existing for a long time and no one used your method, that's evidence that it was non-obvious. People who tried to do it in the past that weren't able to do it, that's evidence it was non-obvious. If the way you did it, people were expecting different results that wouldn't work, you know, you can look at the literature and it turned out it worked in a better way, a different way than it did, that's evidence why it would be non-obvious. So these are some things to consider when you're trying to judge your own invention. You want to, sometimes you don't want to kill it too early. I mean, sometimes a patent attorney can see arguments to make and evidence to make to show that can help you make that case. In 2007, that mentioned more factors in terms of how to decide whether something is obvious. And it used to be it was a very formalistic analysis about whether the reference, you know, a lot of times when you try and achieve obviousness, one patent reference or one document doesn't teach everything, but if you combine multiple documents, have two pieces of it, they can teach everything that you have. But a lot of times the question is it obvious to combine those things in the way that they did? And it used to be that the references themselves had to teach or suggest that you combine them, and very formalistic. And the US Supreme Court said, no, that doesn't make any sense. Engineers are not automatons. They're creative, thinking people, and they use common sense in how to combine things. And they don't have to be told to combine things. They'll use common sense. And that obviously makes a lot of sense to me. And so if they can combine prior art elements using known methods and predictable results, you know, if they're going to use a nail but they decide to use a screw, they know that they can switch because they're very predictable what they do and how they work. And simple substitution, use of a known technique to provide the benefits in an analogous area. Obvious to try. If there's like 3 or a very finite number of alternatives, even though there's no explicit teaching, an engineer would, okay, I'll try those 6 different ways and see which one works. You know, so these are basically common sense ideas that the U.S. Supreme Court came up with. And a lot of times these are good to work in the reverse, to kind of help you make a case for non-obviousness, because you can say, well, these weren't predictable results, or they weren't known methods, or they weren't, and so if you take these statements and turn them on their heads, they can be the framework for making the argument why your idea is non-obvious.